Hello, studio teacher friends. Welcome to the Beyond Measure podcast, land of solidarity for studio music teachers of all instruments and voice types. Christina Whitlock here, your host and self-appointed anytime piano teacher friend. I've got a great episode for you today, if I do say so myself, but I just want to first say thank you to my friends over in the Patreon community for supporting my work. Thanks also to those of you who purchased materials and courses during last week's 20% off sale. Thanks to my consult clients. Thanks to those who bring me in for speaking gigs and masterclasses. And I don't know. I just want to say thank you to all of you who helped me be able to continue putting this podcast into the world free of charge. I seriously could not afford to do this show if I didn't have support from people like those in my Patreon community. If you are interested in joining the kindest and wisest group of teachers on the internet, even if it's just for a short period of time to check it out, I would love to welcome you to the crew. Go find me at christinawhitlock.com/Patreon. And now, on with the show. You are listening to episode 168. Cheers to double duty advice for teachers and parents. I have an old episode of this podcast, it's number 49, that talks about my favorite piece of marital advice turned teacher advice, and I call it my rule of 3. That's a good one, episode number 49, and you should go back and listen to that. But I wanted to pick up that thread today because there is a lot of parenting advice I've been given over the years that translates every bit as well to the teaching studio as it does to our offspring. And since yesterday was Mother's Day here in the US, I figured it was a good day to talk about my favorite parenting advice that doubles as teacher advice. Incidentally, if you haven't figured it out yet, I find advice for teachers pretty much everywhere I look in the world. It's a very specific radar that I have. Have you ever been to one of those baby showers where everyone has to write like their number one piece of advice in a book or on a note card or something? Well, I have. And because I hate being put on the spot, I settled on one go to suggestion that I will always write down many years ago. So I always tell new mothers to be that this is the beauty of parenting, that they get to think back on their own childhoods. They get to decide what they liked and what they didn't. And then now they get a fresh slate to pass on the things that they want to pass on and to ditch what they don't. Honestly, I think a lot of new parents struggle with their own unspoken expectations of what it means to raise a family. When you have only one lived experience, which we all do, it's just hard to imagine what else is out there. Now, this is not a problem if you liked your upbringing, but for those who didn't, it's incredibly difficult to take on that parental role. And the same exact thing goes for teaching. The beauty of our work is this, that we get to keep the things that we loved about our own educational experience, and we get to ditch what we didn't. When we start teaching, the majority of us have nothing but our own recollections to work from. Again, it's a singular lived experience. Now, fortunately, the majority of us really liked our musical upbringings. It's unlikely that students with negative teacher relationships are going to go on and become music teachers themselves. It's just not how it works. Most of us are here because we had teachers that we connected deeply with and remember our musical roots fondly. But if you absolutely hated recitals growing up, and I know some of you did, you do not have to host recitals in the same way now. If you didn't like learning a certain set of etudes, you don't have to expect your students to learn those etudes. Like, we get to be the change that we want to see in the musical world. And that's really exciting. By the same token, if your teacher gave you stickers for every piece of music you passed and you loved that, then hey, you get to keep doing it. I have a friend whose teacher used to give everyone a new composer statue at the end of every recital, and she loved it so much that she does that for her students now. That's great. When it comes to your own musical upbringing, keep the things you loved and ditch what you didn't. It's that simple. That's a solid piece of parental advice turned teacher advice. Now, of course, I feel like the necessary follow up to that is this. Sometimes you find out why they did things a certain way. Like, I used to sing in a church choir that was directed by one of the loveliest humans to ever walk the planet. He felt the music so deeply that tears would often just stream down his face while we were singing. He was also not a trained musician. He had a rather unique style of conducting, and I would sit in rehearsals and keep a mental list of like 9,000 things I would do differently if I was in his position. Well, you probably know where this is going, but the day came where he needed to step down, and I was asked to take over the choir. And, so many of those things that he did that drove me nuts, I started to see why he did them. I quickly ended up reversing course back to his approach in many ways, albeit with a better conducting technique. So, of course, when we set out to forge our own teaching path, we might eventually realize that those things we hated did have a purpose. Like, maybe those etudes really do something important after all. But I say this because with a profession as richly steeped in tradition as ours, I think it's really important to consider if the things we do, the ways we teach, and the programs we offer, like, do they really resonate with who we are as teachers? Or are we just doing things the way we think they're supposed to be done? So, that's our first piece of parental turned teacher advice, okay? Keep what you loved, get rid of what you didn't. Let's follow that one up with a couple of smaller ones, okay? Lightning round. Point of advice number 2: invest in researching what behavior is age appropriate. I know, because in my parenting life, I am occasionally guilty of expecting my children to react to situations and follow through on responsibilities more like adults than children. I can get frustrated when their perspectives appear too self centered or short sighted, but in actuality, they are 100% developmentally appropriate. Now, this doesn't mean we let them off the hook because of their age, but it does help me remember that they are going to need more follow through on my part than I often think is necessary. So, being familiar with the stages of development is going to pay off in big dividends for our teacher selves. Whether it's better understanding the development of fine motor skills, or of logic and reasoning, of social dynamics, or how children and teens perceive the world around them, because it's different than the way we do, by the way. All of that matters, and it's all going to help you better meet the needs of your students. The expectations that we hold for our students need to be run through the lens of age appropriate development, or all parties involved are going to end up discouraged and frustrated. So, invest in that research. Make sure you are actively seeking out proper guidance on what age-appropriate development should look like. Okay, my third point for today: you are not going to be perfect. In fact, modeling imperfection is one of the most important examples you can set for your students or your children. Apologize when you have been wrong or come up short. Admit when you don't know an answer, and then model how to find the answer. I know so many teachers who feel like they are supposed to know everything about everything, and it's just not true, my friends. You know a lot about a lot, but you don't know it all. The burden of trying to have it figured out yourself is too much. We all need to ask for help, draw on the expertise of other people. Staying active in your professional development is not a sign of being a weak teacher. It's quite the opposite. There is always more to learn, and we need to model that for our students, just like we need to model it for our children. Now, I don't want to keep you long today, but I do want to share one last perspective that I find endlessly helpful as a parent and as a teacher. I've tried really hard to track down the original source of this visual with no luck. I know I heard it on the podcast Kelly Corrigan Wonders. It's one of my absolute favorite podcasts, by the way, but I have not been able to figure out which guest I heard say this. So, my apologies to the brilliant person who figured this one out. Anyway, this is the scenario. I want you to imagine that you are in a garden center and you just bought a pack of seeds, but the label on the seed packet is all scratched out. Like you have no idea if you just bought cucumber seeds or wildflower seeds. Who knows? Well, that is how parenting is. You do your best. You nurture that seed by making sure it gets what it needs to grow. You want it to be its brightest, healthiest self. But in the end, you have very little say in who it becomes. DNA is intense business, friends, and fighting it is a losing battle. And the same is true for us as teachers. All we can do is nurture each little seed that comes our way. Now, I know a lot of teachers, myself included sometimes, who find themselves beating their heads against a wall trying to get a student to learn a specific way, or behave a certain way, or practice a prescribed way, when we have no control over changing those qualities in our students. The contributing factors are just too complex. So instead, if we stay focused on each individual student who finds their way into our studio, and we commit to feeding and watering them and paying attention to how they react to direct sunlight versus shade, if we treat each musician who enters our studio as a mystery packet of seeds, rather than setting them on this predetermined path of who we think they're going to become, I have to imagine we're going to raise up generations of really inventive and really useful musicians, right? Remember, you are never going to be able to predict the future paths of your students. I've had students I knew in my bones would go on to become professional musicians and instead ended up as professional welders and laboratory scientists. And likewise, I've had students who started off with basically no commitment to music whatsoever and ultimately really surprised me with where they've ended up. Stay focused on nurturing the mystery seed in front of you. Don't tell it what it's supposed to be. Just take care of it as it is. Don't be afraid to try new things with it. Their growth may surprise you. I think I'll leave it there for today, but I do hope these points gave you something to think about. So let's close out with a toast today, shall we? Studio music teacher friends from all around the world, Today, I am encouraging you to take a step back from the ins and outs of your teaching routine and consider the human being sitting across from you. May we all feel empowered to take the things that we liked from our own musical upbringings and leave the rest behind. May we remember to consider our students' ages and place realistic expectations around their growth and development. May we model just how okay it is to be unsure or even incorrect sometimes, so we are not contributing to a generation of people who think they already have all the answers. And of course, may we remember to nurture the unique individuals that appear in our studios. After all, we might be really good at growing tomatoes, but that's not necessarily going to help us grow a cactus, now is it? Thanks for indulging me in these reflections today, my friends. I am honored, as always, to be doing this work beside you. My glass is raised to you. Hear, hear. That's going to be a wrap on episode 168, friends. Hey, I hope you're feeling really good about your teaching at this point of the year, and I hope you're looking forward to whatever lies ahead. If you are looking for more support in your teacher life, seriously, go check out the Patreon community. That's at christinawhitlock.com/Patreon. And I mean, $3 or $6 a month to connect yourself with well-intentioned teachers who are also really great at what they do. I mean, that is the best bargain on the internet. I'm sure of it. So, thank you again for all of your continued support in all of the ways. Onward and upward toward all the teacher advice that the world has to offer, wherever we can find it. Thanks so much, friends. We'll talk to you soon.